G'day, mate. 40 here. So, if you listen to Mark Halperin's show, he's the top political journalist in America. And he has noted for several weeks now that many top Republicans believe the American presidential race is over and that Donald Trump is going to win. On the other hand, no top Democrats believe the race is over and that Kamala is going to win. So you have a great deal of quiet assurance on the Republican side with regard to the presidential race due to Trump's strength in the Sun Belt states and the Rust Belt states. While no top Democrats are assured that Kamala is going to win. And if you watch MSNBC, right, and you watch Democratic-themed podcasts and shows, right, they are eager to proclaim how Kamala Harris is going to run away with it, but almost no political pros say the same thing. So it's always an important distinction to know what are the professionals saying and what are the regular people saying. And an increasing number of professionals, largely on the Republican side, believe that Donald Trump has this race wrapped up. And if you watch the news, you would never see that perspective. So why would you never see that perspective in the mainstream news if Mark Halperin is right? That many leading Republicans believe the presidential race is over, while no top Democrats believe that Kamala Harris has the race wrapped up. That strikes me as something newsworthy. So why don't you see that perspective on the LA Times, New York Times, and Apple News, NBC, CNN, ABC, CBS? Because mainstream news as a business relies on information from bureaucracies. And given that there are no bureaucracies declaring a likely winner in the Trump-Harris campaign, then you're not getting that perspective from the mainstream media. So when Richard Hanania says the mainstream news is good and true, it's good and true in which respects? It will give you the accurate score of the Sunday night Dallas 2017 victory over Pittsburgh, but it doesn't report on the widespread confidence among Republican leaders that Donald Trump has got the race sewn up. Because these are individuals, and there's not a piece of paper coming from a bureaucracy that substantiates what they're saying. So there's a lot of emphasis on low-quality polls in the news media, right? Low-quality polls in particular show Kamala Harris with a big lead often. Hey, there is something behind you. Uh-oh. Are you familiar with the Canadian Dmitry Loskals? No, he's been telling a lot about how the intelligence agencies are having reporters and broadcasters in hand. He was interviewed by a gentleman who later went on to admit he was working for the CIA. No, I'm not familiar with him. But you get on Mark Halperin's daily two-way show, right, valuable information that you just don't get in the mainstream media, because Halperin is getting that from his sources. And that reminds me of my own time as a blogger. Right, I have consistently reported stories over the years that you would not find in the mainstream media. So, for example, there was a rabbi in Los Angeles, an Orthodox rabbi, who was credibly accused of sexual interactions with underage girls while he was the vice president at Yeshiva University Los Angeles Girls School, Rabbi Aaron Tendler. And he was simply moved around to other Orthodox Jewish institutions. He was eventually the rabbi at the largest Orthodox synagogue in the San Fernando Valley. And he was there for years and years and years. And I did some digging. I found out from my sources about these credible accusations about his sexual interactions with his underage female students at EULA. And initially when I reported this on my blog, I just got a lot of blowback. Oh, that's not true. No way. But as the information developed and I talked to more and more people, including 2 women who, while they were underage girls, right, either had sexual interactions with him or were aware of their friends who had sexual interactions with him, right, then the rabbi stepped down the next day. So I wasn't relying on a bureaucratic piece of paper. On the other hand, if I wasn't absolutely sure of the validity of what my sources were telling me, including these were often first-hand accounts, right, I would have been massively open for a libel suit. And you would not get this information in the mainstream news media, right? It came out on my blog. And when the information and the sources that I was talking to just became overwhelming, Rabbi Tendler stepped down, and he'll never be a synagogue rabbi, I would assume, again. And same with Rabbi David Wolpe at Sinai Temple. I talked to a woman who talked about the emotional affair that she carried on with Rabbi Wolpe and his own turbulent love life and sex life. And soon after I came out with that, Rabbi Wolpe stepped down from Sinai Temple and now works for the Anti-Defamation League. In 1998, I got information that Mark Wallace was responsible for a string of up to a dozen or more HIV infections in the San Fernando Valley's porn industry. And once I reported that on my blog, it forced Mark Wallace to come in and get a proper HIV test, which showed that he was indeed positive, very likely patient 0 in the outbreak in the industry. And again, this was a story that didn't rely on a piece of paper from a bureaucratic source, but it was an incredibly important story. You had someone going around for years spreading an HIV infection in the porn industry and circumventing its testing procedures and getting away with it. You couldn't have a more important story in that industry. But because there wasn't a bureaucratic piece of paper that certified or provided evidence that Mark Wallace was patient 0, then regular news couldn't report on it. Right? News as a business depends upon police reports, government reports, bureaucratic reports, because when it simply reports on what large bureaucracies are issuing, then it's going to be immune from litigation. So when Fox News broke from this model and started reporting wild accusations about Dominion Enterprises and their voting machines, right, they got sued, had to pay out approximately $800 billion, $800 million, because they left the traditional model for news, which is to rely upon official government-issued reports. But official government-issued reports aren't the whole truth, right? That's just a small aspect of the truth. So that's why you are just as likely to be wise and perceptive about the ways of the wider world around you if you pay absolutely no attention to the news. The news has validity and profundity, generally speaking, when it reinforces your own life experiences and what your own eyes tell you is happening in the world around you. The same with academic studies. They should reinforce and provide depth for your own first-hand experiences and observations. Right, it's just fascinating that so many is that not interesting that so many leading political operatives believe the presidential race is over, and yet this perspective is entirely missing from the news? Okay, so the best moral advice, I'm reading the chat, and so the best moral advice and I can ever give myself or anyone else is to conduct yourself as though everybody knows. As though everybody knows what you're saying, everybody knows what you're doing, that your comments are being recorded, that your actions are recorded, and then conduct yourself and send texts, send emails, speak, live in a way that if your actions and words were shown on a major sporting stadium billboard, that you would not be embarrassed. And so if you feel like you're a political dissident and the intelligence agencies are tracking you, that is just another spur to behave as though everybody knows everything. Now, it's not true that everybody knows everything, but it is a useful way to live your life. As opposed to the way that I have often lived my life, that how much can I get away with? People who take on the attitude everybody knows everything, they do not have the attitude how much can I get away with? Because when you accept the premise that everybody knows everything, you're not trying to get away with stuff, and so you're likely to behave in a more socially acceptable and honorable fashion. So if you think that your words are being tracked, your internet activities being tracked, right, that's a good incentive to get back to true north, to make sure that your online activities and the things that you say in texts and on social media is in your own best interests and carries with it overwhelmingly a pro-social slant, and that you would not be embarrassed if your words and actions were played on a billboard at Dodger Stadium or in the Dallas Cowboys stadium. Think about what if 100,000 strangers were reading your words, listening to your comments, watching your actions. How would they react? It's an excellent moral guide for life. So we've got major hurricane bearing down on Tampa Bay, and you see all these stories in the news about people who are too poor to move out of the way of the hurricane. But these stories don't usually get to where the true poverty lies. And the true poverty lies with a lack of human connection. So the best thing that you can do to survive a hurricane, to survive an earthquake, to survive a natural disaster, a man-made disaster, is to have friends and community. So I remember I had to move a few years ago, and I found the whole process incredibly traumatic because it reminded me of my financial limitations and the paucity of choices that I had. So often we'll live life in delusion, and then reality will intrude when we have to move or when we have to get a new job. And that's why getting a new job is often so traumatic for people, because it jars them out of a life of delusion and forces them to confront their limitations. And one thing that made moving so much easier for me is that I had friends. I had one family that I was able to stay in their guest house for a week, and then another friend with whom I was able to stay for a week. And so instead of spending money on a hotel or just being in desperate situations, perhaps having to stay with a friend in the valley, which would be a long ride back to Los Angeles where my life was, right? Because I was able to stay with friends for those 2 weeks, I was able to ride out the storm of a difficult transition of moving. And the real poverty that's keeping many people in Tampa Bay in the face of this hurricane is a poverty of friendships, of relationships, of good ties with family and acquaintances, right? You can often have acquaintances with whom you can move in briefly. If you're in a 12-step program, right, you can often ask for help. If you're in a volunteer program, you can often find help. But the most devastating kind of poverty is a poverty of relationships, because that brings with it a poverty of choices. And the biggest price paid usually for being economically poor is that there are likely some pathologies, some active addictions that are sabotaging your prosperity and preventing people who lead prosperous lives from having any rational incentive to allow you into their life. The biggest problem with being an alcoholic is that, generally speaking, only alcoholics will want to hang out with you. The biggest problem with being a debting addict or a debtor or a gambling addict or an under-earner or an extreme codependent is that only other people with similar pathologies will want to hang out with you. And functioning people are not going to have many incentives to hang out with you. So if your life is drama and anxiety and depression, it's likely because you haven't built up the friendships and relationships and a good state with your family and relations and community that enable you to ride out the storm. So when we had a burst of inflation, I had one friend saying, "How are you planning on investing to ride out the inflation storm?" I said, my primary investments with my family and with my community. And if there's an earthquake and Southern California is rendered unlivable for a year because, say, electricity is down, water and gas lines are down, then I'm blessed to have options of places where I can go to stay with friends or family while I make more plans to get back on my feet. So lacking friends that you can go stay with, lacking good relations with your family that you can go stay with in a time of emergency such as this hurricane bearing down on Tampa, that can cost you your life. And I have my share of tendencies, self-defeating compulsive behavior. And when these behaviors have gotten the best of me, right, my natural default has been to retreat into isolation, which only makes the pathologies worse. So, for example, at various times I've struggled with a lust addiction. Not any concrete behavior, right? Not promiscuity, not looking at porn, not consuming sexually arousing materials. Just my own mind is producing enough lust that the amount of time that my mind is producing these scenarios, it doesn't have a good effect on my life. And for me, the best way that I can overcome that is by enhancing and spending more time in real life, face-to-face with people that I like and respect. And then my mind has other things to naturally reflect on. So when you're not with people, your mind will naturally incline towards thinking about the state of your friendships and what's going on with other people, what's going on with your community, what's going on with people that you like and respect. You might want to share some insights from a book that you're reading or a video that you're watching. And I don't know about you, but if my mind isn't going in that direction, then it's often going in selfish, cruel, lustful, pleasure-seeking directions that just tend to build into a downward spiral. And the best way for me to get around that is connection. Not just in a 12-step community devoted to that particular compulsion, but just with good, upstanding people in general, right? When I get around people, right, my harsher edges get smoothed out. And I find that my pain is half as intense when I can share it with people I trust, and my joy is twice as intense when I can share it with people I trust. And so when the hurricanes of life come your way, and you have people that you can turn to, or that you can help out people when they're dealing with a hurricane, provides a vastly improved quality of life. And it can literally save your life. Right? A lot of people are staying in Tampa because they have nowhere else they can stay. If they'd maintained and developed better relations with their family, relatives, friends, community, religion, volunteer activities, profession, education, right, they'd have more options to get out of town. And one of the biggest problems with being an underowner or a debtor, someone in poverty, is how few options you have. You might be desperately needing a place to stay. And when you're desperately needing a place to stay, desperately needing food, gas, the necessities of life, right, you're far more likely to use bad judgment and to place yourself in great peril and to suffer permanent injuries. I've been reading about the Israeli war with Hezbollah, and this is what stood out to me this morning, that people in Lebanon don't want the Shia, right, the Shia Muslims coming to stay with them. Hezbollah is a Shiite Muslim organization. Israel is bombing Hezbollah arsenals. Hezbollah arsenals are kept in Shia neighborhoods in Lebanon, and those who are not Shiite Muslims recognize that allowing Shiite Muslims in their midst increases their likelihood of getting bombed and hurt by Israel. And so Israel is changing the facts on the ground and creating incentives for Lebanon and the people of Lebanon to shun Hezbollah. So there was a village in Lebanon that protested when Hezbollah tried to bring a mobile rocket launcher into the village because they knew it would make them much more vulnerable to Israeli reprisals. And so I think that's how government policy should work in general. We should be strongly incentivizing pro-social behavior, and we should be discouraging antisocial behavior. And Israel is discouraging an alliance with Hezbollah. Many people make decisions on the margins. They're torn between two options. And when one option is increasingly dangerous and stigmatized and reveals itself to be inept and its communications are intercepted, such as Hezbollah, then more and more people in Lebanon will turn away from Hezbollah. And Hezbollah's strengths, like my strengths and your strengths, are not primarily physical things. They're primarily a matter of relationships. Hezbollah has been so strong in Lebanon because it's been able to develop strong relationships in the country and has developed a stranglehold on the country. But through government policy and through Israel's war strategy, it is blowing up Hezbollah's relationships in Lebanon and isolating Hezbollah, and perhaps isolating Iran, Hezbollah's backer. And that's how I think we should be conducting government policy, right? Incentivize people to do the right thing, discourage people from doing the wrong thing. Would I consider Mormonism to be a Christian religion? Well, Mormons believe they're Christian, so I, as a Jew, am not going to decide one way or another. So, Christians, for example, believe in one God. From a Jewish perspective, belief in the Christian Trinity is irrational, makes no sense, is a completely unacceptable compromise with monotheism. But Christians believe in one God. So Jews don't spend a lot of time trying to contradict them and tell them that they're wrong, right? We welcome that Christians believe in monotheism and leave it at that. So my father was a Seventh-day Adventist preacher and theologian, and he would sometimes make common cause with a controversial Christian apologist, Walter Martin. And Walter Martin was the only guest on Dennis Prager's KBC radio show, Religion on the Line, that Prager regarded as anti-Semitic, because Walter Martin would just rail against Jews, and he'd also rail against Mormons. And so if you're a Christian and you don't think that Mormons are Christians, it's usually not going to be in your own self-interest to spend a great deal of time and energy on that. Right? We largely inherit our hero system from our family and community. And so Mormons inherited their particular hero system from their family and their community. And you're not going to argue someone out of his hero system, right? You can never move someone into a new hero system unless they already want to go there. No guru, no preacher, no rabbi, no con man, no slick Hollywood scheme, no politician, no religious or cult leader can take you anywhere that you don't want to go. So there was a Christian leader in Africa who would ask his followers to starve themselves to greet Jesus, and hundreds, perhaps thousands of them starved themselves to death. But he didn't take high-functioning people and brainwash them into self-destructive behavior, right? He spoke to people who were already predisposed to self-destructive behavior, and he just laid out a path that they were happy to walk along. So I grew up a Seventh-day Adventist, and I converted to Orthodox Judaism as an adult. But I remember as an Adventist, I would hear 20 times as many negative things about Roman Catholics as I did about Jews. And sometimes when Seventh-day Adventists go on to graduate school to study religion at a secular university, they'll be pulled aside and given a talk that Catholic baiting has no place in the academic study of religion. So the kind of hatred displayed for other religions and contempt displayed for other religions that is often popular within your particular religious in-group is not going to fly well in a different social setting. So I don't spend much time worrying about what other people believe in or believe about God, because it's largely just a matter of faith and something that people inherit from their family and community. It's nothing that you can do to change it. And in the United States right now, right, publicly displaying contempt for other religions is not usually a good social strategy, particularly if you're living in a big city or if you're in the professions, if you're a doctor, a dentist, a lawyer, university professor, a CEO, right? The more prestigious your job, right, the more you'll be held accountable for your words. So as a plumber, you have tremendous freedom of speech. Right? As a secretary, you can have a lot of freedom of speech usually. But if you occupy a prestigious position such as university professor, CEO, TV commentator, right, you're going to be held accountable to the elite's code of proper speech. And any deviations from that will likely be severely punished. I notice many people in the years that I've been live streaming almost daily, so since January of 2018, many people believe themselves to be much more courageous and strong than they really are. All right, so they're keyboard warriors, they go online, they say outrageous things, often under their real names, easily identified. And then when the blowback comes, they fall apart. Because when their life falls apart, their family falls apart, they lose their job. And it's a lot more difficult to be courageous, and they absolutely fold. Also reading the news this morning that Israel's not sharing its plans to attack Iran with the United States. So why would Israel not share its plans? Because the United States has been continually leaking Israeli war plans. The Biden administration has been continually leaking Israeli war plans to try to strong arm Israel into doing what it wants. And people are complicated, and you have to be careful who you confide in, because people often try to sabotage you, try to sabotage your plans. So many people are perfectly nice to your face, and they're perfectly nice behind your back until you start making plans to do something that makes them uncomfortable. And then they'll just put a knife in your back. So if you're working on a book that matters to you, overwhelmingly the incentives are you need to keep quiet about that book. Because the more you leak about the book, the more you'll lose the energy to finish the project. And you may arouse opposition to the project. But if something's important to you, sometimes you have to keep it to yourself. Most things in life are better when shared, but some things you have to keep on the down low.